Good evening. Welcome back to my channel. Enduring hardship often shapes who people become, strengthening their resilience and defining their character. Recently, quiet but troubling rumors have begun to spread within palace circles, suggesting that Queen Camilla is experiencing an increasing sense of isolation in a place where she once held strong influence. This shift has not been sudden or dramatic, but rather subtle and unsettling, reflected in small changes in the behavior of those around her. Staff who were once attentive and professional now seem distant and uncomfortable. They avoid eye contact, routine interactions feel tense, and even simple requests are met with unusual delays. These quiet signs point to an underlying unease that has gradually taken hold. Many within the palace trace this change back to a private dinner involving Catherine, Princess of Wales. According to circulating accounts, the evening reportedly turned tense when Camilla made sharp remarks toward Catherine, leaving her upset and causing her to leave early. Since then, the atmosphere within the royal household appears to have shifted. The situation gains further weight with Prince William's reported reaction. Deeply influenced by the experiences of his mother, Princess Diana, William is said to be determined to protect his wife from similar distress. Those close to him suggest he is prepared to take firm action in Catherine's defense. This raises an important question. Has Camilla gone too far, or is this simply the beginning of a deeper rift within the royal family? Clarence House, once known for its calm efficiency and strict order, now seems to carry a subtle tension. The smooth rhythm of daily operations has been disrupted by an unspoken change. Camilla, who has spent years moving from public criticism to acceptance, appears particularly aware of this shift. Even routine moments feel different. Breakfast service lacks its usual precision, and familiar gestures of care seem to have faded. This sense of distance becomes more noticeable in everyday interactions. Tasks are completed, but without warmth or attention to detail. Conversations among staff abruptly stop when she enters, replaced by heavy silence. While outward respect remains, there is an emotional detachment that is hard to ignore. It is not open rebellion, but a quiet withdrawal that may be even more impactful. At the center of this situation is the contrast between Camilla and Catherine. Over time, Catherine has built strong relationships with staff through kindness and thoughtful gestures, earning genuine loyalty. Camilla, on the other hand, appears to maintain a more formal and distant connection with those around her. This difference now seems to be shaping the atmosphere within the palace. Camilla increasingly feels the weight of this divide. Once secure in her role, she now senses a growing disconnect. Even routine matters, such as clothing arrangements or official duties, are affected by delays and inefficiencies. While these actions are subtle, their consistency suggests something more deliberate. The palace continues to function, but the environment feels noticeably colder. Meanwhile, Catherine's influence remains steady and quietly powerful. Staff show their support in small but meaningful ways, reflecting the loyalty she has built over time. Even when she is not present, her positive impact is evident in how she is spoken about and remembered. This contrast further deepens Camilla's sense of isolation. As tensions rise, Camilla becomes more observant, trying to identify signs of disloyalty. However, she encounters only silence. No direct confrontation, just restrained behavior that leaves little room for response. This silent resistance proves difficult to address as it offers no clear target. Eventually, the pressure builds. In a moment of frustration, Camilla openly voices her concerns, accusing staff of undermining her and favoring Catherine. Rather than restoring control, this reaction intensifies the situation in ways she may not have expected. Soon, the issue extends beyond the palace walls. Reports of internal conflict begin to emerge publicly, attracting widespread attention. Public opinion quickly shifts in Catherine's favor, with many praising her composure and warmth while questioning Camilla's actions. Old perceptions resurface, adding further strain to an already delicate situation. Public support for Catherine grows, turning the matter into more than a private disagreement. It becomes a broader conversation about leadership, character, and the future direction of the royal family. For Camilla, this represents a significant challenge, as the image she has worked to rebuild faces renewed scrutiny. Throughout this, Prince William remains a key figure. His response is calm but resolute, shaped by both personal history and present responsibilities. He appears ready to take a firm stand in support of his wife, signaling a shift in the balance of influence within the royal family. Ultimately, this situation highlights an important truth. While authority may come from position, true loyalty is earned through trust, respect, and human connection. Within an environment defined by tradition and hierarchy, it is often the quieter qualities, kindness, empathy, and understanding, that carry the greatest power. The corridors of Clarence House had always carried a certain rhythm, quiet, precise, and unwavering. Every footstep, every whispered exchange, every polished surface reflected an institution built not only on tradition, but on discipline and discretion. For decades, the palace staff had been the invisible threads holding together the fabric of royal life. They moved with purpose, spoke only when necessary, and above all, remained loyal. But something had changed. It wasn't announced. There were no meetings, no declarations, no formal acknowledgement of any shift. Yet those who lived and worked within those historic walls could feel it, an almost imperceptible tension, like a faint crack in marble that threatened to deepen over time. At the center of it all stood Queen Camilla. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A tray delivered a few minutes late, a door not opened as quickly as before, a maid who curtsied just a second too slowly. Individually, these moments meant nothing, but together they formed a pattern, one that Camilla could not ignore. She noticed it most during breakfast. The morning routine had always been predictable. Fresh tea poured at precisely the right temperature, newspapers arranged in perfect alignment, a small vase of flowers placed at the center of the table rotated daily. It was a quiet ritual that anchored her day. But now something was off. The tea arrived lukewarm. The papers were slightly misaligned. The flowers, today's flowers, were wilted. Camilla stared at them longer than necessary. Is this from this morning? She asked, her tone calm but edged with something sharper. Yes, Your Majesty, replied the footman, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. She said nothing more, but she noticed. Whispers began, as they often did, in the spaces between duty. A private dinner. Catherine, Princess of Wales. A remark. Sharp, unexpected. No one claimed to have heard the full conversation, yet everyone seemed to know how it ended. Catherine, composed as ever, had reportedly grown quiet, then distant. And finally, she had excused herself earlier than planned. That alone would not have been remarkable, but the way the story spread, quickly, quietly, almost urgently, suggested something more. Within days, the tone inside the palace shifted, not openly, never openly, but noticeably. For those who understood palace life, silence could speak louder than words. And now, silence followed Camilla. Two housemaids, once known for their easy conversation, would abruptly stop speaking as she entered a room. A butler, previously warm in his greetings, now offered only the bare minimum of courtesy. Even long serving staff, those who had seen monarchs rise and fall, seemed cautious. Respect remained, but warmth had vanished. It was not defiance, it was distance, and that, perhaps, was more troubling. In another wing of royal life, a different energy existed. Catherine. Where Camilla sensed hesitation, Catherine inspired ease. Staff spoke of her not with obligation, but with genuine affection. She remembered names, she asked questions. She noticed small details, a sick relative, a birthday, a quiet struggle, and responded with thoughtful gestures. These things were never publicized. They didn't need to be, because within palace walls, such actions mattered deeply. A handwritten note, a kind word, a moment of acknowledgement. Over time, these moments built something far more powerful than authority. They built loyalty. Camilla began to feel it everywhere. In the way doors were opened, efficient but no longer welcoming. In the way her schedule was handled, accurate but lacking care. In the way her presence was received, acknowledged but not embraced. Even her wardrobe fittings, once seamless, became slightly disorganized. A dress not pressed to perfection, A fitting delayed, a missing accessory. Each issue was minor, but together they formed something undeniable, a quiet withdrawal. If the tension among staff was subtle, the shift in royal dynamics was more defined. Prince William had always carried a sense of quiet authority. He did not raise his voice. He did not act impulsively. But when he made a decision, it carried weight. And now, that weight seemed to be shifting. Those close to him spoke of a renewed determination, a resolve shaped not only by present circumstances, but by the memory of his mother, Princess Diana. William had witnessed what isolation could do. He had seen how silence, when ignored, could become suffering. And he had made it clear, at least to those who understood him, that history would not repeat itself, not with Catherine. There is a line in every institution, unspoken but deeply understood, a boundary between authority and acceptance, between position and trust. Camilla had spent years rebuilding her image, moving from public criticism to a place of royal legitimacy. It had not been easy. It had required patience, restraint, and resilience. But now something threatened that progress, not a scandal, not a public outcry, but something quieter, a shift in perception. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, a delay, a miscommunication, a meeting that did not proceed as planned. Individually, none of it justified what followed, but together they pushed Camilla past her threshold. Is there a reason, she said sharply, her voice cutting through the room, that my instructions are no longer being followed? The staff stood still. No one spoke. Her gaze moved from one face to another. I will not tolerate being ignored, she continued. If there is an issue, it will be addressed directly. Still silence. And in that silence, something shifted further, because this was no longer subtle. Moments like that do not stay contained. They travel, quietly but quickly. Within days, the story had reached beyond the palace, not in full detail, not with confirmation, but enough. Headlines began to emerge, questions were asked, and once again, comparisons were drawn. Camilla, Catherine, two women, two approaches, two very different perceptions. The public, as always, formed its own conclusions. Catherine was seen as composed, kind, and grounded. Camilla once again found herself under scrutiny. Old narratives resurfaced, old opinions reawakened, and in a modern world driven by image and relatability, the contrast became impossible to ignore. For Camilla, the challenge was not new. She had faced criticism before. She had endured scrutiny. She had navigated public opinion with care. But this felt different because this time, the tension was not just external, it was internal, within the very walls where she was meant to feel secure. No one would say it outright, but the signs were there, a quiet alignment, a subtle shift in loyalty, not official, not declared, but felt. And in an institution built on unity, even the smallest division could carry significant consequences. What happens next remains uncertain. Will the tension ease? Will relationships mend? Or will this moment mark the beginning of a deeper transformation within the royal household? What is clear, however, is this: power alone is not enough. Position alone is not enough. In a world where tradition meets modern expectation, it is the human elements, kindness, empathy, connection, that define true influence. The story unfolding within the palace is not just about conflict, it is about contrast, about the difference between authority and affection, between command and compassion. Queen Camilla stands at a crossroads shaped by perception, history, and the quiet judgment of those around her. Princess Catherine represents a different path, one built on connection, consistency, and care. And between them stands the future of a monarchy, navigating not only tradition, but the expectations of a changing world. In the end, the question is not who holds power, but who holds loyalty. Because within palace walls, loyalty, once lost, is the hardest thing to reclaim. The days that followed did not bring resolution. If anything, the atmosphere within Clarence House grew heavier, more deliberate, more controlled. What had once felt like subtle unease was now unmistakable. though still cloaked in the discipline that defined royal service. Nothing openly defiant ever occurred. No orders were refused outright. No lines were crossed in a way that could be formally challenged. And yet, the resistance was there. Camilla began to notice a new pattern. Everything was done perfectly, technically, but without care. Her morning tea arrived on time, but no longer at the exact temperature she preferred. Her schedule was accurate, but lacked the thoughtful adjustments that once made her days smoother. Even her personal correspondence, once handled with quiet efficiency, now required repeated follow ups. It was as though the staff had drawn an invisible line. They would serve, but they would not support. This distinction, subtle as it was, created a profound shift because service could be demanded, but support had to be given willingly. Camilla, increasingly aware, began to observe more closely. She noticed how quickly conversations died when she entered a room, how glances were exchanged, brief, cautious, but meaningful, how certain staff members, once confident in her presence, now seemed careful not to linger. It wasn't fear, it wasn't disrespect, it was something far more complex: restraint, and perhaps judgment. Royal households have long memories. Staff who serve within them often dedicate decades of their lives to the institution. They witness history not as headlines, but as lived experience. They remember tone, behavior, patterns, things that never make it into official records, and they form opinions, quietly, privately, but firmly. The alleged dinner incident had not been heard by all, but its emotional echo had traveled quickly. Those who respected Catherine felt a shift, not just in loyalty, but in principle, because within palace culture, dignity mattered, and anything perceived to undermine it left a mark. Elsewhere, Catherine remained unchanged. If she was aware of the growing tension, and it would have been difficult not to be, she gave no outward indication. Her public appearances continued with the same calm confidence. Her interactions with staff remained warm, measured, and genuine. If anything, her presence felt even more grounding, and that consistency spoke volumes. Because while tension creates uncertainty, consistency builds trust. Staff gravitated toward that certainty, not in obvious ways, but in small, telling gestures, a tone of voice, an extra moment of care, a quiet willingness to go beyond what was required. Behind the scenes, Prince William's influence was becoming clearer. He did not issue public statements. He did not engage in visible conflict, but his position was understood. Those within the royal household recognized the subtle signals. Meetings held, priorities shifted, attention redirected. William was not reacting impulsively. He was recalibrating, and in doing so, he was sending a message. The future of the monarchy would not mirror its past. For Camilla, the shift became increasingly difficult to ignore. Isolation within a palace is unlike isolation anywhere else. There are always people around, always movement, always activity. And yet, it is entirely possible to feel alone. She felt it in the absence of small courtesies, in the lack of spontaneous conversation, in the way interactions became strictly functional. Even laughter, once occasionally heard in the background, seemed to have faded in her presence. Determined not to lose her footing, Camilla began to reassert her authority. Instructions were delivered more clearly, expectations were reinforced, standards were emphasized. On paper, it was a return to structure. But in practice, it had the opposite effect, because authority, when tightened in response to resistance, can often deepen the divide. Staff complied, but the emotional distance remained. If anything, it grew. What made the situation particularly difficult to address was its invisibility. There was no single act of defiance, no identifiable leader, no moment that could be formally challenged. Instead, there was a shared understanding, a quiet alignment among individuals who never needed to speak openly to act in unison. This was not rebellion, it was consensus. And consensus, when formed silently, is one of the most powerful forces within any institution. Meanwhile, beyond the gates, speculation continued to build. Royal watchers began to note subtle changes: body language at public events, the positioning of key figures, the tone of official statements, or lack thereof. Media outlets, cautious but curious, began to frame questions. Had something shifted within the royal household? Was there tension behind the carefully maintained image of unity? No confirmations were given, but silence in such cases often speaks for itself. For Camilla, the external attention carried an added weight. She had spent years reshaping public perception, moving from controversy to acceptance through consistency and restraint. But public opinion is rarely permanent. It can shift quickly. And once doubt is reintroduced, it can be difficult to contain. The emerging narrative, fair or not, began to mirror older ones, and that familiarity made it all the more difficult to counter. One evening, alone in her private sitting room, Camilla allowed herself a rare pause. No staff, no schedule, no performance, just silence, and in that silence, a question surfaced. When did control begin to slip? Was it a single moment, a single remark, or something more gradual, something that had been building beneath the surface for far longer than she had realized? What Camilla was confronting was not simply a challenge to authority, it was a challenge to connection. Because loyalty within the palace did not come from titles alone, it came from relationships, from how people felt when they were seen, heard, and valued. Catherine had cultivated that, quietly, consistently. And now, in contrast, its absence was being felt. The question was no longer whether tension existed. That was clear. The question was what would happen next? Would there be reconciliation? An effort to rebuild trust? Or would the divide continue to widen, shaping not only internal dynamics, but the future direction of the monarchy itself? Within the palace, nothing is ever truly still. Even silence carries movement. Even restraint carries intention. And as the tension between Queen Camilla and the unseen forces around her continues to evolve, one truth becomes increasingly clear. Power can command action, but only respect can inspire loyalty. By the time the third week passed, the change inside Clarence House could no longer be dismissed as temporary. It had settled, not as chaos, not as confrontation, but as something far more enduring, an altered atmosphere, one that shaped every interaction, every decision, every silence. From the outside, everything appeared unchanged. Engagements continued, schedules were maintained, appearances were polished and precise. To the public eye, the royal household remained exactly as it should be, composed, unified, unshaken. But inside, the rhythm had shifted, and those who lived within it could feel the difference in ways that could never be captured in photographs or official statements. The staff had perfected their approach, no mistakes, no delays significant enough to draw formal criticism, no visible signs of resistance, but the warmth, once subtle yet ever present, had disappeared entirely. It was replaced by something colder, measured, intentional. Camilla no longer had to search for signs, they were everywhere, in the tone of a greeting, in the absence of initiative. In the way requests were fulfilled exactly as given, but never beyond. This was the paradox she now faced. She still held authority, her title had not changed, her position remained intact, and yet influence, the softer, more powerful force, was slipping through her grasp, because influence is not enforced, it is granted. And once withdrawn, it cannot simply be reclaimed by instruction. Within royal households, there are always layers: outer staff, senior aides, trusted confidants. And now those layers were shifting. Camilla's inner circle, once stable and dependable, had begun to contract. Some remained firmly loyal, others became quieter, more cautious in their advice, and a few, subtly, almost imperceptibly, began to distance themselves, not out of disloyalty, but out of uncertainty. Because in environments where power dynamics are shifting, alignment becomes a matter of survival. Across the broader household, a quiet alignment continued to take shape. No meetings, no discussions, no declarations. And yet, a shared understanding seemed to guide behavior. Catherine represented stability, consistency, a sense of emotional safety. Camilla, increasingly, represented unpredictability, not in action, but in perception. And perception, within the palace, often carries more weight than reality. For Prince William, the situation carried deeper meaning. Though he remained outwardly composed, those closest to him recognized the undercurrent beneath his calm. He had seen what happens when emotional isolation is ignored. He had lived through the consequences of silence within royal walls, and he had no intention of allowing history to echo unchecked. His approach was not confrontational, it was strategic, measured, but unmistakable. Boundaries were being drawn, not loudly, but firmly. There were opportunities for resolution, moments where a conversation could have taken place, where clarification could have been sought, where tensions might have been addressed directly. But those moments passed, not out of avoidance, but out of understanding. Because within the royal family, some conversations are never spoken aloud. They exist in glances, in timing, in the careful choreography of presence and absence. And by the time both sides recognize the need for words, silence has already taken root. As internal tension deepened, the external world continued to watch. Public appearances became more scrutinized, every interaction analyzed, every expression interpreted. A shared event, a brief exchange, a moment of eye contact, or the lack of it. Each detail fed a growing narrative, one that no longer relied on confirmation, only observation. Through it all, Catherine remained unchanged. There was no visible reaction, no shift in demeanor, no attempt to address speculation. And that perhaps was her greatest strength. Because in a situation defined by tension, stillness becomes power. Her consistency allowed others to project certainty onto her, to see in her what they needed: calm, dignity, reassurance. And in doing so, her influence grew without effort. Camilla, meanwhile, had moved beyond frustration. She now understood the nature of what she was facing. This was not a momentary disruption, it was a recalibration of relationships, of perceptions, of power, and it could not be undone through authority alone. For the first time, she began to consider something she had long resisted: adaptation. Reputation within the monarchy is both fragile and enduring. It takes years to build, moments to challenge, and once questioned, it lingers, quietly shaping every future interaction. Camilla had rebuilt hers once before, patiently, deliberately, but doing so again under different circumstances and greater scrutiny would require something more: not control, not correction, but connection. The question now was whether she could change course, not publicly, not dramatically, but internally, in the small daily interactions that define life within the palace. Could she soften where she had been firm? Could she engage where she had remained distant? Could she rebuild what had quietly unraveled? These were not questions of strategy, they were questions of character. For the staff, the situation was equally complex. They were not rebels, they were professionals, bound by duty, guided by tradition, but also human. And humans respond to how they are treated. Over time, their collective experience had shaped their response, not in anger, but in withdrawal. And withdrawal, once chosen, is not easily reversed. Clarence House had not fractured in any visible way. There were no sides declared, no divisions acknowledged, and yet the unity that once defined it felt altered, less cohesive, less instinctive, more careful. Every action now carried awareness.